On this episode of Passive Real Estate Investing with Mavericks, I sit down with Mitch Roschelle to uncover problems and profit.
Hey Mavericks, this is Ava Baukamp, and this episode of Passive Real Estate Investing with Mavericks is brought to you by Legacy Impact Investors. We are an industrial investment firm located in cash flow country, the Midwest. We strive to shield off risk and beat inflation, all while producing predictable cash flow. We curate real estate investment opportunities for busy professionals and other real estate investors seeking passive income. To learn more about what we do and connect with me, go to www.legacyimpactinvestors.com.
Maverick, noun, unusual person, a visionary, leader, go-getter, an independent thinker. They see the vision for their life and pull that future towards them with an unyielding belief that things can and must be better. They achieve what most won't. Innovative, influential, daring, and direct, with a remarkably high tolerance for taking calculated risk. A foe to the status quo. This is Passive Real Estate Investing with Mavericks. Your host, Neil Timmins, has been involved with over $300 million in real estate transactions. He's a published author, commercial property investor, and real estate syndicator. This show is for those who want to learn how to earn passive income through real estate investing. Now, here's your host, Neil Timmins.
Welcome to Passive Real Estate Investing with Mavericks, where we provide actionable steps for you to grow your passive income and become job optional. During this episode, you're going to discover how Mitch is solving problems and profiting at the same time. Now, for those of you who are new, I'm your host, Neil Timmins. I love passive income from real estate. Now, before I introduce you to today's Maverick, I want to make a request that if any point during the show you like what you hear, well, give us a thumbs up. Or if you love what you hear, give us a written review. Plus, be sure to take a look at the description in this episode. We packed it with thousands of dollars in free resources. Now, today we've got the privilege to learn from somebody who's been in the industry for nearly 40 years at this point. Prior to his career in real estate, he was in an accounting firm as a partner. Ultimately, it all changed when he retired from that and found his way into a new business, leveraging his contacts and his experience. Now, we describe today's Maverick as someone who's passionate about finding unique niches in real estate in which he can solve problems and capitalize with profit. Let me introduce you to today's Maverick, Mitch Roschelle. Mitch, how are you?
Excellent, Neil. Good to talk to you.
I'm glad that you're here. I appreciate that. Say, for the audience's sake, who are you, where are you from, and what do you do?
Well, I'm wearing a hat with the Florida state flag on it. I'm a native New Yorker, and maybe I'm the only one who's done this, but I moved from New York to Florida. Like, nobody else has done that.
I heard about you.
Yeah, I'm the guy.
You're the guy.
Native New Yorker, been involved in the real estate industry my entire adult life. And I can give you a little background on that in a second. But I spend most of my time in the East Coast of Florida. And when it's getting too hot down there, I fly back up to New York, but I'm back and forth a bunch. And when I realized that this was both audio and video, Neil, and I had decided to put the hat back on, and the one I picked was a hat with the Florida state flag on it, because I am a Florida resident.
Well, that's terrific. I think for those in the audience who do not know the Florida state flag here who are watching video, now they've been educated as to what it looks like. That's wonderful. Let's talk about real estate and maybe go anywhere you want with this and bring me forward a little bit. But let's start at the beginning. Tell me about the very first commercial deal you bought. I may be taxing your memory here, but tell me about the first one.
Well, I spent almost 40 years at the accounting consulting firm PwC. And I was one of the founders of its real estate consulting business back in the 80s. I'm going somewhere with this, Neil, trust me.
Yeah.
And I ran that practice for a couple of decades before I retired and went on to do other things, which we'll talk about in a bit, I'm sure. My first real exposure to real estate was the savings and loan crisis.
Yeah.
And we were doing some consulting with small regional community banks that were very long real estate, and the waters were getting a little rough. I have so many Back to the Future moments and goosebumps when I see headlines today that just remind me of those days. But we did a lot of workouts and restructurings. The funny thing about being in Florida is the first bank I worked on was a bank called Commonwealth Savings and Loan, owned by the Chapnick brothers. I should have known something was wrong because they literally had gold-plated toilet seats. I'm not making this up. And every time I drive south on I-95 in Florida, I live in Palm Beach County, but south of Palm Beach is Fort Lauderdale, Broward County, and I'm driving south on I-95, and I get to the Commercial Boulevard exit. I literally, you asked about the first, I get like this feeling because that was literally the first big assignment that we had in real estate. So I've spent my entire career at every point in the life cycle of real estate. I remember one speaking engagement I had. I've done a ton of public speaking. And I had a chart, and I can't remember the exact chart, but it kind of looked like the sine curve, if you can imagine what the sine curve looks like, or a roller coaster. And somebody in the audience looked at me, and it could have been values, it could have been cap rates, it couldn't have been anything on the chart. I wish I remembered exactly what the chart was. Somebody looked at me in the audience, raised their hands, because whenever I speak, I encourage audience participation. And the guy raised his hand. He goes, I never realized real estate was a cyclical asset class. And I was like, I didn't know if it was like a setup or like what, like.
Sure.
And I've always said there's no stupid questions, but that was a bit of a stupid observation. I'm not going to lie to you, but real estate's cyclical. And the only way to survive in that industry as a service provider to it is to continue to reinvent yourself as the market changes. So when the great financial crisis came, it was like, okay, deja vu, been there, done that. And I really feel as though, Neil, we're almost in that space again. I see like the Silicon Valley banks, the First Republics, the Signatures in New York, and so on, falling apart. And it just literally reminds me of the late 80s during the savings and loan crisis.
So there's a lot of similarities between then and now that you're getting that gut feeling. What's different today?
Yeah, I would say that well, first of all, the FSLIC doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah.
It's just the FDIC.
Right.
What feels similar, and I would say this, if I were to make a very macro observation, anytime a financial business fails and you looked at the root cause of why it failed, there was a mismatch between the maturity of assets and liabilities, right? Mm-hmm. They borrowed on a short-term basis and invested on a long-term basis. And when they had to repay their borrowings, they didn't have liquidity from their investments. Why did savings and loans fail? It was because they were regulated differently than commercial banks, and savings and loans were able to actually invest equity. So they were doing mortgages that were participating and actually had like an LP slice. Right. The LLC didn't exist at the time, but the limited partnership did. And in addition to being a lender, they were also a limited partner, right? But if you look at today, the complexity of the way financial institutions structure themselves, they're taking some outsized risk in terms of the liquidity of their underlying investments. And at the time, though, interest rates actually similarly were falling because interest rates had gotten to be insane in double digits. So this was like 9% paper with a kicker. But don't forget, there were still certificates of deposits that were on the balance sheet that may have been double digits.
Double digits, yep.
Right?
Yep.
Right. So I wouldn't rule out, and I'm, good thing my memory's still okay. There were probably CDs that were 5-year CDs that could have had a 12 coupon on it. And they were going out and finding real estate that they were buying for cash on cash return of 9 with hope that all the tenants would move out and they'd be able to up the rents. And they had an equity participation that got them in SuperCalc because it was 4XL or in Lotus 123.
Yes.
It got them to a 15% and they go, oh, this works. We're going to get 15 on our asset and we have to pay 13 on our liability. Yeah, they got like 2 on the asset, and the bank's fund crumbled. So
and so we're talking about the mid 80s, and you're talking about coming off the interest rate cycle, coming on the down curve where interest rates were falling, we're past the peak, and the banks locked themselves into long-term liabilities, as you said. That means CDs, which they've gone and paid X for, and invested at Y. And it became far more challenging coming down that curve. Today, it seems like we're still riding that curve up. We're probably in like 82, 83, 84, maybe somewhere in the early 80s, riding that curve up. We may be at the peak. Who knows, right?
Yeah. Yeah, but what happened if I were to dissect Silicon Valley Bank?
Yes.
And interestingly enough, I had money in Silicon Valley Bank over 250 in a deal that I was an investor in because we had proceeds from a sale that got deposited in Boston Private Bank, which was owned by Silicon Valley Bank. So it got trapped on a Friday in that was weekend from hell. But thanks to government intervention, we got our money back. But banks have been paying nothing to depositor holders for, I don't know, since the financial crisis, literally nothing. 17 basis points or, 17 of 1%, like nothing, right?
Yeah.
And now all of a sudden, interest rates started shooting up. And investors were looking at certificates of deposit or looking at savings accounts. And I'm talking about the most Main Street investor to even the Wall Street investor and saying, wait a second, am I crazy? Or is the 3-year treasury like over 5 right now?
Yep.
And they started pulling money out of banks and putting them into money market funds. And all of a sudden money was leaving the bank. This was not a run on the bank because people were worried because somebody tweeted there's trouble at Silicon Valley Bank.
Right.
No, this is because they weren't giving out toasters. They weren't paying market at the time, market rate for the deposits. And depositors just started getting smart and they were moving money out and they were putting it into treasuries. And guess what? The bank was conservative. The bank actually invested in treasuries. The only problem is they bought them a little while ago.
Yep.
And when they had to sell them to pay the depositors off, they were selling them at a loss. And what looked like a strong balance sheet, it wasn't mark to market because the auditors or the regulators said market to market. It was mark to market because they had price discovery on their portfolio when they went to sell it. And they cleared the market at a much, and they had a multi-billion-dollar hole in the balance sheet. Much different problem than what we saw then, but it's the same outcome, which is you got to look at assets and liabilities and figure out. And by the way, that was not credit risk. The savings and loan crisis was because of credit risk.
Correct.
I mean, I don't know who your audience is, so I'll be clean for your audience. Those were crappy loans, okay, during the savings and loan crisis. This was investments in treasuries, but they had liquidity risk.
Yeah, you hit it to set up your explanation. The duration, right? Their liabilities and their assets from a duration standpoint did not match. They've got themselves into a mismatch. They were paying us almost nothing for our deposits, our money that we sit in the bank. In order to make any real net interest margin, they had to go out on duration. They were buying longer term bonds. They weren't buying 30, 60, 90. Yeah.
In a time when the treasury curve was steep, right?
Yes.
They all got into trouble when the treasury curve inverted. And for your audience benefit, that's when short-term rates are actually higher than long-term rates, which should be the other way around. And that's because the Fed listen, if I was to blame anybody for the mess that we're in, I would blame the Fed and I'd blame the Treasury Department. And then in particular, the Treasury Secretary, because she used to run the Fed, like probably she should have known better.
Yes.
For saying, that inflation was transitory when like we all knew it wasn't. Like,
yes.
I don't care how many credits of undergrad economics you have. Like you knew that inflation isn't temporary.
Right.
And the Fed easy money policy lasted way too long after the financial crisis, right? The Fed became a little too focused on the market and not enough focus. And like if you were at full employment, which we were, mandate number 1.
Yes.
And you were at stable prices, mandate number 2, and inflation was well below their 2% PCE target, and unemployment was below 4%, why are they still like buying mortgage-backed securities and treasuries to boost the balance sheet of the Fed? Like that made no sense to me. No. So they created all this liquidity. They inflated asset prices, and maybe they had a reason. But when you unwind that, like something's got to break. And what's breaking are these small community banks. And what's happening is exactly what they never wanted to happen. A major consolidation in the banking industry where we have all these too big to fail financial institutions. They absolutely did not want this. Republicans and Democrats alike did not want this. And that's what we're going to get.
So they claim, right? They're the ones through their policies with the FDIC coming out and backing SVB with all their uninsured deposits, which was read a couple of reports. One indicated 88%, one indicated 93% of all deposits at SVB were non-insured, meaning above $250,000.
In dollars, right.
In dollars. Yeah, correct. Above $250,000. So the uninsured deposits. When the Fed comes out and says, all right, we're going to back it all. FDIC comes out and says, we're backing it all. And that leaves everybody in small town USA to wonder, are my deposits safe with my little bank, with my regional bank? Or must I be taking dollars and cents off the table and going with the banks that in 2008, the federal government backed, improved, there's a segment of them that are too big to fail.
Yeah. No, listen, JP Morgan Chase is too big to fail. Wells Fargo is too big to fail. Citi's too big to fail. US Bank is probably too big to fail. I'd say they're on every corner in Florida. Truist is probably, that's formerly SunTrust, and BB&T. But let's take a BB&T, not to get overly granular, but that was one of those banks that was just acquiring all these other banks because in the wake of the global financial crisis, the FDIC and the Treasury Department was saying, you buy that, you buy that, you buy that.
Correct.
And they became too big to fail. They were small. They were Farno and they were small, and SunTrust too. Now they've become behemoths, and that renders them too big to fail. But ironically, if you look at the way there was intervention from the Fed, the Treasury, the West Wing, obviously Silicon Valley Bank and First Republic were too big to fail because they didn't let them fail.
Right.
And what's next?
Correct.
Right. Signature Bank in New York, but they were invested in crypto. So I got no sympathy for them. But literally, no one listening to the sound of my voice should have a deposit in a single bank and a single account over $250,000. No one.
Correct.
But what do you do when you get a wire transfer from a transaction? Do you tell the wirer to break it up into, let's say, $250 million? Do we break that into hundreds of individual wire transfers and set up hundreds of accounts so that money, when it clears and sits there for 2 days, is safe? I think that's a place where the Fed needs to play, right? If the Fed,
it's an administrative nightmare. Yeah. Correct.
If the Fed wants to intervene in an intelligent way, they should create some sort of clearing platform where people who do have accounts over 250 or a transaction with proceeds over 250, it's safe while it's there, right?
You're going to tax my memory, so somebody can fact check me on this. I want to say it was about 1983, maybe it was 87 though. So somewhere in the 80s, I'll give it. The FDIC moved their limit to $100,000 coverage. Yeah. It was in the wake of the financial crisis, 2008, that they temporarily moved it to $250,000. Right. That was set to expire in 2009. Eventually got put into Dodd-Frank. Eventually got put into permanent placement at $250. If you want to model that for inflation, we should be at about $350 today. And
by the way, if you have your money in Merrill Lynch, UBS, Morgan Stanley, and it's insured by SIPC, it's covered for $500,000.
$500.
This makes literally no sense. I think, unfortunately, things that require Congress to act end up getting really messed with politically because there's big voices in the banking committees in both chambers that want to use any time we're open the door to change a regulation to impose other regulations. And that's the challenge with modernizing anything.
Yeah, you're right. I want to circle this back and pivot. I want to go down a real estate rabbit hole.
Yeah.
Because I know there's some interesting things you're doing on multiple fronts on direct investment side. Tell me about your most recent deal. And then I want to go down the path of what you're doing specifically on some of the housing side, some of the workforce housing side, because you're doing some unique things there.
Yeah, and I would make one of those recent deal when I left PwC, just to sort of round out my resume to save you listening from going into LinkedIn. You're welcome to. When I left PwC, I did a couple of different things entrepreneurially and was trying to connect the dots. You build up this great portfolio of contacts. You've now been added to that, but you build a great portfolio of contacts over a long career in professional services. And then not that I was looking to monetize it, I was just looking more to have fun with it. And I ended up joining a firm based in Florida, because I'm in Florida, called Madison Ventures Plus, that tries to find places where no one's paying attention to real needs for capital in an industry, right? So one of their portfolio companies, which I'm not involved with, is a lender to the cannabis industry. And you don't have to read too much to realize that if it's legal at the state level, but not legal federally, there's a lot of limitations on the ability to get conventional financing for an industry. So they have probably the largest platform that provides liquidity to the cannabis industry. It's a company called Sweet Leaf. It's not one of my portfolio companies, but to have background in real estate, I was helping them do the same thing. If we just look at this statistically, if you look at household formations, and for those listening who may not know this, and you may cheer in your car listening to this, but a household formation is when children move out of their parents' house. That's when you generally get the warm reaction from an audience.
Yeah. Right.
If you compare aggregate since the financial crisis, since the housing crisis, you compare cumulative household formations to the new addition of supply of both single and multifamily housing in America, we have 3 to 4 million households for which we haven't created new supply. So we have a housing shortage in this country. During the COVID period, the median house price from 2020 to 2023, in that 3-year period, went up $100,000. So we have an affordability problem. We have an availability problem. Interest rates have just gone up, so affordability has become a different issue. But I'm talking about single family and multifamily. So it could be for sale, it could be for rent. We just have a housing shortage. Rents have gone up high, out of touch for most people. So one of the macro things that we are focused on in Madison Ventures Plus is workforce housing and just creating supply of housing in markets and in segments that doesn't exist. And workforce housing, these are not barracks for people who work at a factory, because somebody once said to me, workforce housing. And I'm like, no, it's really people who were in the workforce, right? A couple who's moving in together for the first time, somebody who literally just entered the housing market, they are household formation. They moved out of their parents' house. My kids are literally living in my house in New York because you know what it's like to rent an apartment in New York City? It's insane. So they're not stupid. They're living at home, saving money, right? They're putting money in the bank and buying CDs that pay 5%. They're actually, think about it, if it was a year ago, that would have been awful. Right. So in any event, the need for housing is our issue. So you mentioned the deal. One of our portfolio companies, which is based in California, is taking, I don't want to say taking advantage because that doesn't sound right, but we're using a provision in the law of the state of California, which is brilliant, that allows you to tear down a single family home and as of right, put up to 8 units on that site in the state of California. It doesn't exist in every city because there are some cities that say, we don't want that in our city. There are some not in my backyard places, but in Los Angeles County, in the city of Los Angeles, for example, you can do it. Okay. So we're buying single family homes. We're demolishing them. We're putting down a foundation or two, and we're putting up to 8 units of multifamily housing on those sites. But if you do it the way everybody else does it, and you take 2 years from land acquisition to certificate of occupancy, or 3 years like everybody else does it, you're missing not only the market opportunity, but you're not solving the pressing need for housing. Okay. All you're doing, it's lather, rinse, repeat. It's what everybody else does in the housing market. So what we did was, or what we're doing, is we invented a process to build in probably a third of the time. What could take somebody 3 years, we can do in a year. What we do is in a factory, and we have one, we manufacture all of the panels that go into the house. If you close your eyes, you're driving on I-95, and you're somewhere in Georgia driving north, this is me a week ago, and you see a house on a flatbed driving on I-95 with a car behind and a car in front that says wide load. We are not doing that. What we're doing is we'd actually put all the panels that would comprise the 2 buildings that are going to go sit on that site on the flatbed, and we're going to deliver all the pieces. Okay. And then we literally screw the thing together on the site. So screw the floor in. Yeah. It's literally, I don't want to minimize the brilliance of it, but think about putting together an IKEA piece of furniture that you can actually don't have to watch 5 YouTube videos to figure out, and you don't need an Allen wrench. But we've put in all the plumbing, all of the electrical, the home runs that run electrical throughout the house. All of that stuff is already in, and we just need to put it together. The stairs that connect one floor to another, because some of our units are duplexes, already done. Build those on the site, just have to be put together. So we can, from land acquisition to occupancy, full occupancy, it's called stabilization, we can deliver in about 11 to 14 months, depending on site vagaries, permits, stuff like that. But there's no zoning, right? We don't have to deal with any of that nonsense. So we're delivering it, I'll say better, faster, cheaper. And we pass the savings along to the tenant because we don't need to charge rent to make our Excel model work. We know what our rent needs to be. So if we're slightly below the guy around the corner, but we lease up in no time. And we're meeting that need. So in terms of a real estate deal, I don't think I've been this excited about a real estate project in a really, really long time, because not only are we solving a societal problem, and not only are we doing it in a very ESG way, if you want to talk about ESG, but we're building it so much more efficiently. I mean, I'm literally, as we speak, I am digging out a 1,000-gallon in-ground oil tank in my home in New York. Literally, it's happening as we speak. There's nobody working today, of course, right? But like the number of permits and the number of subcontractors and we don't deal with that. You know why? Everybody who builds the houses that I just mentioned, they're full-time employees of our company. They get healthcare benefits and get bonuses based upon production. Right?
Are you a passive real estate investor seeking financial freedom? Well, today's market's unique and it's ever changing. Now is the time to get educated on how to strategically invest in commercial real estate for long-term financial freedom. Grab your copy of How to Passively Invest in a Changing Economic Environment. Go to www.mavericksinvest.com. Production speed. So what I heard you say is instead of being exposed to all the elements, the rain, the weather in California, the sun, the heat. Most of this is done inside of a factory,
air conditioned
indoors,
factory.
And built to a specification level that is standardized, taken to site, and then ultimately assembled on site.
Correct. With a fraction of the crew that you would need to frame a home. And the interesting about home building, if you've ever watched it, framing happens really fast. They bring a gazillion people. Okay. And they fly through it. Maybe it's to spec. Who the hell knows? But you know what you have at the construction site? Two things. And I can promise you this. You have waste. You can't believe. Like you could build another house with the waste. Okay. And number one. And number two, you have theft. Because I guarantee after working a long, hot day in the sun, wind, rain, whatever it is, okay, they don't lock up every piece of lumber. And lumber became one of the hottest commodities about a year and a half ago. And every construction site was pillaged at night by literally a local contractor who's doing a kitchen remodel for somebody and said, I can get 6 2x4s. Why stand in line at Home Depot? I can get them from the guy down the street. We don't have any of that waste. We don't have any of that shrinkage, as the retail industry would call it. And we don't have to wait for a plumber to drill a hole. We don't have to wait for an electrician to run wire because we've done it all, right? We're not avoiding any code requirements. We're just bringing whatever expertise is needed to build the home, trade expertise, we bring them. The only thing we don't do is roof, right? Because we haven't vertically integrated roofers yet, but we've got the electrical, plumbing, all that stuff done. Hooking up the electrical to the city or to the water to the city, we're using subcontractors. Those are the things that slow us down sometimes, but everything else is speed to market. It's unbelievable.
No, it's incredible. And then I would imagine cost savings there. What you're saying is you can pass it along to the tenant at that level and you probably lease up faster. You're operating in a much faster basis. And in an environment where we have increased interest rate costs of borrowing funds, you're able to recoup savings along that by the reduction of the construction time.
I love talking to smart people because you figured it out. Before I had to say it, Neil, you said it yourself. Time is money in real estate because it's a capital dependent asset class, whether it be equity that wants a preferred return or return on its investment. The clock is ticking from the day an equity investor gives you $1 to buy that land. The clock is ticking. Or if you're borrowing money and you're drawing down, the second you make that draw, not only are you paying for the commitment, you're also paying every time you draw money. So the faster you build it, the less interest costs you incur. And the quicker it's stabilized, the faster you can get lower cost financing from Freddie and Fannie because they have a mandate to create more affordable housing, right? And by the way, this is lowercase a affordable. This is not Section 8. This is workforce housing, but we do it affordably. And it's also new because if you look in some of these neighborhoods in Los Angeles, they haven't built anything new since the 70s. I mean, I like it. My grandmother lived in West Hollywood, and we're New Yorkers, but Sandy Koufax left Brooklyn when the Dodgers went, and she got on a Greyhound and followed Sandy Koufax. I'm not making that up. And I remember as a kid going to Los Angeles to visit my grandmother. And the kind of housing my grandmother lived in, she was a retiree, didn't have a lot of means, but she lived nicely. That's still there. This is 1960s vintage housing, still there. And if you want to rent, you know what the last time one of those places was renovated? So if you drop in a neighborhood, 2 buildings with 4 units apiece. And by the way, I'll say this, I left out. We're in neighborhoods that are in transition, okay, but transitioning for the better, okay? And we are in very, very diverse neighborhoods in the truest sense of the word diverse. There may be a higher concentration of people with one specific ethnic background in a neighborhood. That is true of any big city. There are concentrations. Sure. Yep. But one thing that the Asian population and the Latino population, who are 2 big diverse groups in Southern California, have in common is they tend to have multiple generations living together. So we build 4-bedroom, 4-bath properties, units, 4-bedroom, 4-bath, so that you can have unit. One of the ones where we have is 6 units. Each of them is 4-bedroom, 4-bath. Each of the units. These are big. These are like 20-something hundred square feet. These units are bigger than the single-family house that was there.
That used to be there.
Used to be there. You know, what's interesting is if you can kind of in your mind's eye think about Los Angeles and all of the movies that you've watched, the houses are really close together when you drive down the street. What no one ever realizes is how big the backyard is. So we're basically putting whatever the setback is on the front, we're going right up to the line, and we're putting the first structure there. Okay. Yep. We leave room on the side. We put the parking in between the 2, and then we put the second in the back. And these can be 3-4-story buildings. Some of them are duplexes, but we make really, really efficient use of the land. We put solar panels on the top. We put charging stations for those of you who have electric cars. We bring enough amps to the site that you can actually charge your car. Sometimes in California, that gets tricky, but there's multiple generations in there. So grandma, children, grandchildren, they're all living together. And that's what that market demands. So it's not just workforce. And by the way, the worker in the workforce is probably the family in the middle, the mother and father and their kids, but they have their parents with them. And it may be both sets of parents. And no one's providing housing for those people. Nobody, right? And buying a single family house and renovating it to make room for all of that, that's out of reach. Could be $1.5 million. And these people don't have the means or the down payment for that. So
get there.
We're meeting the market where the market is, and that's the biggest screaming part of the demand. So you asked about my latest thing. I figured I'd talk about the thing that I'm most passionate about, which is this project in California. So
that's exciting. You know, from the start to finish, the financial savings crisis of the S&L crisis of the 80s to today and the environment we're in today, and the thing you're most excited about from a project standpoint, you've learned a lot over the years. Right. As it relates to real estate, execution of transactions, and seeing a whole bunch of changes. What have been some of the biggest lessons, the biggest changes that you've seen through the real estate environment during your tenure in this industry?
I would say I'm going to answer a different question, but answer your question. If we have more demand than we have supply and prices are going up, real estate is the only stupid industry that in a period of rising prices doesn't create more supply, right? If widgets were selling for more today than they were yesterday, and the profit margin was growing on the widgets, believe me, everybody would be out making widgets because they could sell them, okay?
Correct.
So why are real estate people not building? Well, there's 3 L's, and then there's 2 more L's. The first are land, lumber, and labor, okay? So land has become more expensive because of supply and demand dynamics. Labor, well, it's the tightest labor market. Like, we went from having a jobless recovery to having a labor crisis in the middle of a period of inflation. Like, makes no sense, okay?
And a technical recession.
Right, in a technical recession. Like, that makes no sense. And then land, lumber, and lumber, to me, I needed an L, so it's the holding place for all building materials, okay? Then there's 2 other L's, and one of those L's is the answer to your question, and the other one has a part of it. One of those L's is laws. The number of regulations that have been steeped upon people with the best intention to want to supply housing to the market, it's made it so that they can deal with the other 3 L's, they just can't deal with the rules, okay? And then the last is lenders. And lenders keep having their hands tied behind their back because of more rules. Okay. I didn't want to bring ours to it, but regulation, because that's, Neil, the direct answer to your question, but I wanted to set it up. Regulations are the thing that has confounded me in all of this. And it's ironic that I'm talking about doing this in California, which anybody listening to the sound of my voice would assume is the biggest regulatory nightmare. And Ronald Reagan, may he rest in peace, like is rolling over in his grave thinking that the state in which he was a governor. There's a man who spent his entire political career, once he changed parties, but his entire political career fighting regulations and trying to deregulate. And California is like so steeped in regulations that the state of California has deregulated land development in existing communities to create a way to solve the problem. And by the way, if I thought that this was a secret, Neil, love you, but I wouldn't be on your podcast telling everybody. And you know why I'm telling everybody? A, because I think your investor audience would be interested in hearing about it. But moreover, because there are 30,000 sites in Los Angeles that could do this. So if somebody else wants to build the site next to us, knock yourself out. And I'll leave you with this. One of our legacy portfolio sites before we started scaling the business was finished probably in 2020. Okay. We started right around the same time. A guy next to us was doing the exact same thing. We have completed, leased, and sold at a profit that property. This guy still doesn't have a certificate of occupancy. They're still like schlepping like cinder blocks to the construction site. So we were taking advantage of, and I hate saying it that way because somebody, if they rip that soundbite off, they would think we're doing something nefarious. We're taking advantage of an existing law for its intended purpose. And I've dealt with the two last L's. And I've dealt with land it is what it is, right? I have to buy a single family house at whatever the seller's willing to sell it for. Lumber, we've cut that cost down considerably because we don't waste a nickel of it. Okay. And labor, we solve that problem by hiring full-time employees that we pay health benefits to and bonuses to. And you know what else we instituted? An employee referral program. Because as we start to scale, we need more workers, right? To me, the biggest risk in that business model is finding talent. Not a problem, because everybody who works for us, who's happy to work for us, is happy to convince their friends who they used to work with for a subcontractor to come work for us. Because what we don't do is we don't furlough our workers because we don't have a project. We pay them. And if we had a period where we didn't have an active project of where we were in funding. So you know what we did? We took all the lumber, we kept buying it. We already have the design. We know what we're building. We just kept building. We used the guys in the factory. We just kept building panels. So as soon as we poured the foundation, boom, ready to go. So it's a different business model. And when I tell real estate people about it, and your audience are mostly on the investor side, which is great, as opposed to the operator side. All the operators I talk to would tell me 5 reasons why that's not going to work. Oh, that can't work. That can't possibly work. How could you find somebody who wants to be an employee? What?
Health benefits and a paycheck they don't ever have to track down.
Yeah. That comes every Friday. Yeah.
That comes every Friday. Yes. Yeah. Oh, yeah, I understand the distinct competitive benefit associated with that from a contractor basis.
Do I lose sleep about our ability to have 50 or 100 projects going simultaneously and knowing we have enough full-time employees to do that? Sure. Okay. But we're scaling intelligently. We're not going from zero. We're not like a Formula One car that makes a turn at 16 miles an hour and then 2 seconds later is going 150 miles an hour. Like, that's not the way to run a business, but we're scaling the right way. And we're adding workforce where we need it. And the really interesting thing I'll leave you with from the workers' perspective. And by the way, I mentioned ESG, no waste, solar panels. If you really want to talk about ESG, we provide healthcare benefits to our employees. You really want to talk about ESG like that? But we're teaching trades to some of these guys. So if you were a carpenter and that's all you ever did, you had a nail gun or a screw gun, and you just attached 2 pieces of wood to one another and you cut them, like that's all you did. But now all of a sudden you're drilling holes and running cable to wire the entire house. Okay. Running cable. You're now learning another trade. You're drilling a hole, carpentry, and you're taking PVC, we use some of that, the new technology for crimping plumbing, where you don't sweat the pipes anymore. You put the pieces together and you crimp them together. They're learning to do that, right? So, oh my God, like
taught them a new skill, new trade, ultimately becomes more valuable in any environment.
And you know what? If we lost one of our foremen because he or she, and we have both, wanted to start becoming a home builder themselves or build their own home because they think that they learned all the trades to do it, God bless. To me, that would be, I put their picture on the wall in the factory as the greatest success story, that we taught a guy who came to us at 19 as a carpenter, and then at 25, he was building homes, right? Wow. Yeah. And I'll tell you, every plumber, electrician that I've ever met in my life builds their own homes. And you know what they do? Every one of them screws it up. So that's what's really cool about it. And when I talk to our investors who are socially conscious and passing judgment on that at all, that's to me the coolest thing about it. The fact that we're creating workforce housing, at the same time, we're also creating a workforce, right?
Yeah, that's incredible. Let's do this. Mitch, I want to move on to the final segment, what I call the final four. What do you think holds most passive investors back from hitting their personal next level, whatever that happens to be?
I would say if you're a passive investor in real estate, then you need to align yourself with sponsors, because that's where your flow of investment opportunities come from. And I don't think the typical, and I don't mean anything disrespectful to anybody listening to the sound of my voice, but the typical, I'll call them retail investor, however sophisticated they may be, doesn't have a big portfolio of sponsors that they're aware of. Okay. So I've got this burning desire to invest in real estate. I have a financial advisor, and he or she has limited access to real estate deals. So I invest in the first thing that comes along because I want to do it, but it may not be the right deal for you. Okay. It may not be the right kind of income. It may not have the right tax benefits. It may be suitable for an IRA because that's where I want to put it, but they don't have a mechanism for you to put it in IRA because you can't get a custodian for it because it's not something with a CUSIP number. I think that access is the biggest problem that a passive retail sophisticated investor has to real estate. And I'm going to give a shout out to one more thing. We're building a parallel business within Madison Ventures Plus, where we're going to get, I'll call it a co-op of registered investment advisors. So these are the folks that your listeners are already doing business with. And we're going to partner with this co-op of registered investment advisors to create more opportunities for those RIAs to introduce their clients to these kinds of alternative investments, not just ours, right? There could be 6 other deal sponsors that could be part of the portfolio, but that's the problem. It's access. And I was talking to one of my former partners in my firm, very sophisticated guy, and he was investing in a real estate deal. And I was talking about other things, and he was telling me about it. And I was like, boy, like, that deal is long real estate in the wrong market at the wrong time, right? So what you have to do is align yourself with the right sponsor and then invest in something that's got the right risk profile for the market environment we're in today. And that's the hardest thing for anybody listening to me. And you're going to go to your RIA, or you're going to go to your big wirehouse firm that, you have the rest of your money in. They're going to give you access to, and by the way, they're constrained regulatorily in terms of what they can show you, right? Correct. They're going to give you what they have in their 3-ring binder, and it may not be right for you. And that's the real hard part. And then, by the way, Neil, that's why programs like yours make a difference, because you can enlighten. And I also speak often at the Money Show, if you're familiar with it. And it's an opportunity to engage with passive investors and tell them there's other stuff out there, guys, like not just the non-traded REIT that your RIA showed you, which, like, after fees, like, what's your real return there?
Right.
So,
yeah. Outside of real estate, what are you most passionate about?
I love to fish, hence Florida. And I'm a golfer, but I love to fish. And I'll leave you with a story. I was playing in a pro-am. I've been blessed in my life and from my past life to have played in a lot of pro-ams with PGA Tour professionals.
Yeah.
And I was playing with a guy who lives in Jupiter. He used to, his name is Briney Bird. And Briney had played in more PGA Tour events and never won one than anybody else in the history of the PGA Tour.
Wow. Yeah.
And he came in second one. So no one for more than me. And we get into the tee box, and Briney said, all right, we're teeing off like a shotgun at 1 o'clock. He goes, at 5:30, I'm in my car in the parking lot. We're in Jacksonville. I know how to get to Jupiter. And I looked at the tide tables, and I'm taking my son on my boat that's in my backyard, and we're going bone fishing tonight. It's a full moon, and we're going bone fishing. So, and I said, so let me ask you a question, Briney. What would you rather do on any given Saturday? And he goes, I'd much rather fish. And I said to him, is that why you've missed so many cuts in your life? You get the weekend off. But I love to fish. And I also love spending time with my family. I have a wife and 23-year-old twin boys. And the common denominator between all of us is we like to go out fishing. So that's why we live in Florida. You can literally do it in your backyard. Literally.
That's exactly right. Your favorite book is what?
I was going to make a joke and see if I had like Art of the Deal behind me. You want to know my favorite book is? God's Honest Truth. Favorite book. It's on my shelf. It says the Constitution of the United States of America.
United States. Yeah.
I decided to not say Bible to keep it a little light, but to me, this is my favorite book. And it's literally on my desk. We are the only country in the world that has codified a constitution. We're a democratic republic. Ironically, both of those words are in that phrase. And we are the only one with a codified. All of these parliamentary democracies like the UK didn't have a codified constitution. And the brilliance of the founders of this country to have built the system the way they did, it was an experiment 250 years later. But the few words that are in this book, like, it's amazing to me. So greatest book ever written, greatest book I've ever read.
Your favorite way to make an impact in the community?
I've given back a lot of my time to the community throughout my career, and I've spent a lot of time volunteering in schools. And I've always, to tie in answer to question 1 to answer question 3, you teach somebody to fish, they eat for a lifetime. So I've spent a lot of time teaching financial literacy in public schools in the United States and abroad. And that's the biggest way you can make an impact. You teach a child, I haven't done such a good job of my own, but you teach a child the difference between need and want. That is the foundation of financial literacy.
Mitch, this has been a great conversation. I probably could talk to you all day because I know you're
sure. You got my cell phone number. Call me when you get bored.
There you go. A wealth of knowledge.
But if you hear fish on in the background, you know what I'm doing.
Yeah, exactly. No, it's tough to beat fish in the open waters.
I don't freshwater fish, by the way. No disrespect to anybody listening that's going to tell me about some largemouth bass or a trout. I don't tie flies. If it doesn't have salt in the water, I ain't fishing it. And by the way, circle of life fishing. If I eat it, it goes in the boat. If it can get used for bait for catching another fish, it goes in the boat. If it can't be eaten or can't be used as bait, it goes back where it came from.
It's wonderful. For people, they want to find you, they want to follow you, they want to connect with you. Where can they go? What should they do?
Yeah, so you can follow me on Twitter, which is Mitch_Roschelle, and it's ROS like Sam, CHELLE. If you follow me on Twitter and decide you don't like my politics, feel free to unfollow me. It's fine because I am very political on Twitter. I spend a lot of time on television at Fox Business Network and Fox News Channel, so that may answer your question about whether or not I'll save you the Googling me then. And business in which I'm a principal is Madison Ventures Plus. And you can find Madison Ventures Plus, and you can learn more about some of the portfolio companies. And if you're interested in finding out more, and you follow me on Twitter, I'll follow you back, and you can send me a direct message, or my email address is on the Madison Ventures Plus website. You can contact me. Happy to discuss real estate. And Neil, if you have me back, I'm happy to come back.
That's wonderful. We'll be sure to set it up in the future. No doubt about it. The Twitter, link to the website are below in the show notes for everybody. Mitch, I appreciate your time.
You bet. Neil, have a great day.
Thanks so much. To our listeners, pat yourself on the back. You guys have made it to the end of the show, and most people never finish what they start. If you receive value from today's show, be sure to share it on LinkedIn, your Facebook page, or your social media platform of choice. Subscribe to never miss a valuable episode in the future. And if you found value in today's episode, give us a thumbs up with a positive review. If there's a particular topic you'd like to hear about, well, I want to hear from you. Shoot me a message on LinkedIn. The link to my profile is below in the show notes. You can connect with me there for more valuable content.